Okay, it's Friday afternoon. Hopefully, y'all can hear me. Um, we're gonna do a quantum bull versus bear debate. Some guy said he wanted to debate me, so we'll see if he comes. But in the meantime, we'll see if there's anybody who wants to state their bull thesis. Just hit request, and we can chat. But for now, there's a lot of people who say they like quantum, but very few who want to talk about it. I am not surprised why. But I'll wait. Anybody? Any bulls on quantum? So my basic position on quantum is that these stocks, the four stocks that I've posted, and it extends to more companies, efforts, and stocks and stuff like that, is that there actually is no point to building a quantum computer. Okay, somebody wants to talk. I don't know who this guy is though. Maybe you can DM me or tell me if you're a quantum bull because I don't recognize you. Um, so anyway, my point on quantum is that quantum computers are actually very slow. Whenever some idiot writes an article that they're fast, they don't know what they're talking about. Our current computers are fast from NVIDIA and Intel and so forth, but quantum computers are actually quite slow. They're only fast in the sense that certain algorithms can be run very quickly on a quantum computer. In fact, there's really only one that can be run very quickly on a quantum computer, and that's Shor's algorithm. And so, unless you're dealing with Shor's, there's no real sense in trying to use a quantum computer for anything else. So like the image that these companies try to conjure is like they could do mat moles really fast, or some other like operation, but it's just not how these machines work. In fact, they do operations very slowly compared to a normal processor. They're a billion times slower, anywhere from a million to a billion times slower at basic operations. It's just that for factoring, you can get away with a lot less operations. So even though it's slower, it finishes the job faster. But that's the only situation. Anyway, somebody said he wanted to debate, but oh, okay, you can you're welcome to chat. Thanks, Michael. Go for it. What's up, dog?
How's it going? I just wanted to go over a couple bullet points that I've heard. One of the main ones that I'm seeing quite a bit is the BlackRock and Vanguard ownership in QBTS or whatever. I heard it's mostly from Russell 2000 and these ETFs, but people are fairly convinced that just because big players like BlackRock is purchasing shares, that it's all of a sudden a massive bull case because they see something that everyone else doesn't.
Yeah, obviously these firms don't have any active analysts that are sitting there saying I like this stock or that stock. Almost everybody on Wall Street who meets these companies runs away as fast as they can because they're this kind of the scariest companies with the worst management teams I've ever seen. So it is a really the only people that like them are the bankers. So if you look at these four stocks, you cannot find one institutional holder that is out there saying I actually like the fundamentals and I think these stocks are going up. So there's no bull on Wall Street, and Wall Street's always got some bull who's convinced in the story, but you really have to look really, really hard to find even one fund, long only, hedge, anyone that's really bullish on the outcome of quantum. I think the people that are bullish on quantum in general are just people that like stocks that are going up. And again, you have a really underrepresented shareholder base with these stocks. There's almost no institutions. And to your point, the institutions that do exist are quants that are providing liquidity or um, you know, index kind of index attached investors. Um, so, what else were you hearing?
That was kind of the main point, but besides that, obviously you've covered a couple of the other points regarding like pharma purchasing. Well, in terms of pharma research, that was a big point I heard. I know you've already kind of partially debunked it, but I was still a bit, confused as to. I know it's a small market, like in general, but like, what is it why can't that kind of computing be used for pharma research when a lot of people are fairly convinced it can be?
Yeah, not a lot of people are convinced it can't be. So if you talk to people in pharma, they mostly will laugh at you over that. So in pharma, when we discover drugs, we don't really need quantum in any way, shape, or form. In fact, we barely need computers. And the proof of that is if you look at Schrodinger, the revenue is 100 million. And in fact, the head of Google Quantum privately told a friend of mine that they do throw their hands up and wonder why they're doing this sometimes because Schrodinger, they pointed out Schrodinger is kind of their best case scenario. And what's ironic about that is it's really not clear to me that quantum will actually help you at all in drug discovery because when you do a medicinal chemistry campaign, it's not about getting the best binder. It's about getting a family of drugs that you can make trade-offs on. So metabolism, toxicity, drug-drug interactions, plasma binding. You have to sort of take a series of chemicals and test them in the real world because you can't test all this stuff in a machine. You can barely test any of this stuff in a machine. And see kind of which drug specifically, whether you take it and iterate on it or you found one from the original series that you can actually take and put into humans and then see what happens. 99% of the expense and frustration of drug development happens after you invent the drug. So there really isn't much to do in that early stage, of drug development. Most of the spend of drug development comes after you file your IND. It comes from manufacturing in that early stage as well. Those early campaigns can cost a lot. But when it comes to actually designing the drug and developing the drug, for small molecules, it's not that hard. There's a team of chemists involved. They spend a little money, but you're not going to be spending more than a handful of millions of dollars. Maybe if they're really complex and thorough work, but that work isn't going to be done. It's mostly biology stuff and other things like that, assay development, stuff quantum can't help you with. So the actual part of the system where you're doing ligand docking and changing different functional groups, quantum really can't help you much. And also, there's not enough exactness in chemistry that you can use. I mean, you add a methyl group to make a hydrophobic interaction. There's not much else you can do there that a quantum computer is going to tell you. If there's a hole in the protein you're trying to bind, and you need this much energy, you don't need a quantum computer to tell you that. You need a methyl group or you need a hydrogen bond there or whatever. So I think basically there's anybody who's an expert in that space knows that. I talked to some friends at SpaceX who are experts in material science. I mean, they make rockets for crying out loud. And they said they also don't see a need for quantum to help them in material science. But the thing about quantum that's really important to understand here is to get back to basics, which is why is this supposed to help? Remember, these machines they're around 100 hertz to 100,000 hertz. Your phone, your laptop is gigahertz. Okay? So why would you ever want one of these things? You can do simulations on your computer. The only reason you'd ever want one of these things that's a million times slower is if you can use an algorithm that's billions of times faster. And there's only one algorithm that exists that way. And it's Shor's algorithm for factoring large numbers. Factoring large numbers only has one purpose, if you can call it that, which is cryptography. So in pharma, using quantum systems to simulate quantum reality is very, very far away. That's not the plan for the quantum companies. That might be the plan 50 years from now. But right now, we can't do that with quantum computers.
So this kind of leads into my next question. This is more so D-Wave specific.
Yeah.
But why is D-Wave fixated on annealing, and then all the other players, even all the old penny stocks like IonQ and all those other players, why are they going for your more typical a quantum computing route compared to annealing? Like, they seem to be the only players. Is there something unique about it?
Yeah, I think it's a fraud. I mean, it's just fraud. The quantum computing is a real thing. I've been fascinated by it since I was a kid. It's extremely fascinating because if you've ever studied complexity or computer science, you know that factoring a large number, a semi-prime, is a very difficult problem computationally. There's no known algorithm that can get you polynomial time speed. It's an exponential algorithm. So a 300 digit number is literally impossible to factor, but a 50 digit number you can factor. 100 digit is pretty challenging. 200 digits is basically impossible. And as you scale up, you basically no amount of conceivable computers could ever do it. And then you show a quantum algorithm, you say, no, this thing can do it. If you can create this computer can do that 300 digit factor really easily. You could do a 1,000 digit factor really easily. But you need to actually make this machine. And that's stunning. I mean, if you study Turing completeness and things like that, there should not be a computer that is different that can actually make it faster. That's the whole point of a universal Turing machine, that every computer is simulated by another computer. Not in this case. There's the lone exception where you actually get this amazing speed up. You go from the exponential world to the polynomial world. It's almost like a wormhole or something. You're in a totally different regime, and this super hard problem becomes super easy. And so when you think about annealing, there's no recharacterization of the complexity of the problem. And that's why D-Wave has never been able to prove that their machine's any faster than any normal computer. So I've asked many times to pay D-Wave to use their computer. They've said no every time. I've sent people under the table, not revealing their true identity to try to get the computer from me. D-Wave said no again. D-Wave's revenue is down 30% year over year, and they claim that they don't need a quantum computer. Their quantum annealer is good enough. This is a crazy claim because they have almost no revenue. And if their quantum annealer was good, people would be using it. People find technology. ChatGPT's revenue is 20 billion. It didn't take much for it to catch fire. It didn't take much for people to see that this is really great technology. Let me use it. They couldn't stop it in a way. As you guys may know, my partner helped launch ChatGPT, and they couldn't contain it once they released it. It was that fast that the whole world caught fire. Not the case with quantum annealing, where they've been at this for almost 20 years with quantum annealing, and nobody's found a use case. So I think D-Wave is really a scumbag company that, if you look at their financials, you'll sort of see what's going on. And again, we're not willing to sell a cloud service. I've used almost every cloud service on the planet: AWS, CoreWeave, Azure, GCP. I'm using Lambda Labs as we speak to run an algorithm. I've never heard of I've even used the other quantums, IonQ and Rigetti. I've never heard of a company, IBM, not willing to rent out its computers on the cloud, but kind of vetting those customers to make sure they don't say something bad or do something on the machine that could be, damaging to their business long term. And so D-Wave to me is just this uber scam. At least IonQ, Rigetti, and the others, there is something to chase there. And the prayer that, and this is kind of what Satya and Sundar have said, the prayer that, someday there might be more quantum algorithms. To me, that's sort of a very fanciful. I mean, we have not had real new quantum algorithm for 30 years. It's a really rough space that a lot of people have left and abandoned because it's kind of a dead space. Most quantum people have pivoted to AI or to something else. Our friend Beth, who we started the EAC movement with, he pivoted to thermodynamic computing, which is an interesting kind of form of analog computing. No, there are not that many more people still persisting on quantum, and the handful of people that do and are real experts in the space have said over and over again that we're 20 to 30 years away. And that means we're 20 to 30 years away from shores. So that means we're 20, 30 years away from being able to factor a really big number, which has no use other than the fact that we use it for cryptography, which we can easily replace and do cryptography some other way. So there's no need to worry about that. Nobody really is going to care about the shores part. So what are we chasing? And Chris Monroe, the founder of IonQ, says it very clearly in many interviews that we're still looking for an application. We don't have an application. And praying that, yeah.
So this kind of leads us to my next question. So I know that before you were very bearish on IonQ, and then they recently started doing a bunch of acquisitions, and the stock price kept going up. And then, well, now you got D-Wave. They're doing the same thing. They just raised a whole bunch of money. They have about what, $800 million.
Yeah.
Are you? Because I know you got a short position. Are you not worried that they'll follow the same route?
No,
Start
I mean,
buying up companies and then growing inorganically.
Not at all. I mean, you can grow inorganically by buying McDonald's franchises. It doesn't mean you've created value. Anybody can. Acquisitions are a skill. Valiant was a famous pharmaceutical company that basically had unlimited access to the capital markets, and their stock went down 90% because they made bad M&A deals. Just doing M&A does not make your stock go up. In fact, almost every roll-up ends in tears, because what ends up happening is the stock goes up for a little while, but then the shareholders realize that the managers are not actually doing smart acquisitions. They're taking capital and lighting it on fire. They probably could get better returns buying the S&P 500. So I know one of the companies that IonQ bought, I have a friend that also bid for that company, and he bid half the price. And he thought he was bidding too much. Now, this is not a small deal. It's a multi-$100 million deal. And the company they bought is largely in shambles. So one of the problems Valiant had when they bought pharma companies is that you actually have to run these things. And I was fairly close to the Valiant senior management team, and one of the problems they had is they would buy these companies and they said, Martin, once we buy them, we leave them alone. We don't try to integrate. We don't try to do synergies. We just buy them and let them continue to operate. And they kind of didn't have a great plan for how to do 50 to 100 deals a year. Now, IonQ is not doing 50 to 100 deals a year, but you still do have to run these businesses. When I ran my company, I tried not to do more than one acquisition a year, because as much as I love doing deals, I really didn't want to just kind of get, in a place where, I was not really able to keep in touch and keep on top of the businesses I was buying. You have to slowly bring them in, their culture, their people, their customers. You don't just buy 10 companies and, pray. And I think it's a desperation move by both management teams. Now, neither of the stocks have really gone up since they went on their acquisition spree. The only thing that's gone up is their market caps, because they've issued tons of shares. And to me, it's not very bullish when a company says, okay, I have this hot stock right now. I'm going to issue as many shares as I can to get as much cash as I can and as much, new businesses as I can. What's wrong with your current business? Why isn't your current business good enough? Why do you need to sell off your allegedly really promising business to buy other businesses? To me, that's a disaster. IonQ is largely pivoted from quantum computing. They're talking about everything but quantum computing now. They're talking about quantum networking. They're talking about space-based quantum. They bought a space company. It's fucking insane. The guy says that he's going to be, at the very least, this is his words, he's going to be at least as big as Cisco, because quantum networking will replace normal networking. Well, quantum networking is not really needed. Quantum networking is a really fancy thing where you can actually tell if your channel is being eavesdropped on, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. But right now, with normal encryption, which both in its current state and in its future quantum proof state, will also have that feature of being extremely robust. The only people that would need quantum networking, which is, one, it's largely science fiction at the moment, but it's so robust that it's like basically spy-proof, and we have other systems like that, by the way. Quantum network is not the only one. But a quantum network like that would maybe only need to be used by military or something like that. There's no need to make a quantum internet. And in fact, the other funny thing about this is the kind of quantum networking that's being proposed by IonQ, which is not like full quantum networking, is already been adopted. It's been around since '84. And if you want quantum, quote unquote, quantum networking, you can do that right now with fiber optics. So it's not really a new technology, and it's fairly low margin. And very few people need it or feel the need that they need to use it, but you could deploy it right now. So I think IonQ is largely just trying to get revenue from other things and distract from the fact that their quantum system's actually kind of not even in the top half, I would say, of quantum computers. I would put Quantinium as number one, and I wouldn't put IonQ in even the top half. Google's up there, IBM, Microsoft's kind of this weird dark horse, and the publicly traded companies, it's hard to say. They're all kind of shitty, but I would probably put IonQ and Rigetti as tied. And remember, these companies couldn't come public themselves. They needed to do a SPAC, and they had down rounds in private markets. So this was an ugly space. And, I think traders out there now want the next big thing. So they have Joby, they have Archer, they have all kinds of crazy stocks, Oklo, all the nuclear stocks, the EVTOL stocks, the, you know, tons of weird stocks that are going up a ton. But they're all bubbles and they'll all pop. And the only question is, as a short, can you survive it? But as a long, like this is just Russian roulette. I mean, all of these companies will go down 99%. It's just a question of when does the musical chair stop?
I got a question. It's a little bit off topic, but it's about Joby. I know you have a pretty sizable short
No,
position.
I don't have a sizable short position. I have a small short position.
Oh, small short? Okay. But regarding Joby, I know that they do like drone manufacturing. Well, like it's more so a larger scale, like public transport. Is that correct?
No, they don't have any revenue.
But I know, but I'm saying like, couldn't they pivot towards like a military application? So like building drones and stuff like that. That would be my.
I mean, it's a $16 billion company by market cap. They have no revenue. Could they do something valuable? Well, sure, anybody can do something valuable. My privately held company has more revenue than Joby, and we're growing fast. And we're not making, these aviation vehicles, but could they decide to start being a military contractor? I'm sure they could, but there's other companies that are doing that, and I think the military has VTOLs, and I'm not sure that Joby has to prove that they have the financial wherewithal to just do their basic business plan, which is pretty flawed, I think. And I don't know, it's a really big market cap for a company that has $15,000 of revenue. I mean, just having low revenue doesn't automatically cross you off my list. I mean, I think that biotech naturally, we develop a drug, work hard, we have no revenue for a while, and then the revenue comes, when the drug gets FDA approval, the clinical trials work. And, so I'm willing to humor concept companies. I don't pick on all of them, but in this case, I'm not sure that you're getting a whole lot better than a helicopter with this vehicle. And basically, the helicopter sort of ferry and creation business is much larger than, is already smaller than Joby's very large market cap. So like all the helicopter manufacturers in the world, plus all the helicopter Uber's businesses in the world, they just bought the main one called Blade for only a couple $100 million. It really wouldn't even add up to Joby's current market cap, which is just science fiction. I mean, it's a concept stock. When reality hits and they actually have to do revenue by using their VTOLs to ferry people around Dubai, which is their current plan, assuming these things are safe and they have some advantage versus just a plain old helicopter, that's their business plan, and it'll be really hard to see them be able to be successful in what's kind of a low margin, hard to operate business. I mean, their planes, what I would do is I would trade it at a premium to how many planes they built. Because in general, when you buy a 747, let's say you buy a plane for $50 million in your commercial airline, your hope is that you would get more than 50 in earnings from it. Otherwise, you wouldn't buy it. But you're not hoping you're going to get $1 billion in earnings from buying a $50 million plane. Otherwise, the Boeing would keep the planes themselves. And they would just do their own airline. Why would they need to sell it to Delta? And so you might get double your money when you buy a plane like that. And the same thing applies to Joby. Their planes cost around $40 million a piece. They've made like 8 of them. The value of the plane is not much more than the cost of the plane. Their margins are not going to be 95%. They're going to be like 30%, like every other one. So at the end of the day, the peak margins these guys could have and the peak amount of planes they could make, it just doesn't make sense that this thing could ever be worth that much. Now, again, am I a VTOL expert? No, I'm more of a quantum expert. But it seems like just another stock that's just out of control and, bulls on parade trying to run up the next GameStop or something like that. And reality is just so different. And, eventually there's going to be kind of a reckoning. But again, I'm betting that, I could be wrong.
And just to kind of like wrap up, I know you were shorting both QUBT and D-Wave.
Yeah.
Which one are you shorting more and why? Because I feel like, wasn't QUBT a beverage company at one point? I feel like they're are more deserving of a short or a larger short position compared to D-Wave?
I think they're both pretty bad. I mean, it's hard to know what the worst quantum is. Like, I think Rigetti is honestly the only one that I'm considering lightening up on because they're at least honest. The Rigetti team says anybody telling you that quantum revenue is real is lying to you. They said this publicly. And I'm impressed by that because he's right. You know, he admits that the quantum computers, the gate-based ones at least right now, have no utility whatsoever. If you try to run Shor's algorithm on any of these computers, they will crash. They don't work. You can run a partial Shor's algorithm, which is not fully quantum. It's mostly classical, but you can do that just to sort of get a taste of the quantumness. And the biggest number my girlfriend and I were able to factor was around a 5-digit number, which is not very good. That's an instantaneous factor for any computer, and even a 10-year-old could sit down and factor a 5-digit number eventually, probably in half an hour or something. So these computers are really limited as they exist. Now, I still like playing with them because I want to see when they can maybe factor a 20-digit number, a 50-digit number, a 100-digit number. And, Bitcoin, there's implications for Bitcoin. There's implications for encryption as a whole. There's implications for number theory. There's a lot of interest in this from a scientific perspective, but the practical economic perspective is pretty limited. Now, on the annealer side, again, I have a sneaking suspicion that annealers are no better than classical optimization algorithms. And there's a debate about this. D-Wave says, yes, it is. But many, many papers say, no, it's not. And every time D-Wave tries to claim something, the scientific community comes out and just basically shows that they're lying. And they won't just let anybody use their computer, which is very shady to me. Why wouldn't you want revenue? Why would you have a machine you're trying to rent out for thousands of dollars an hour. You have people willing to pay for it. Every cloud company I know wants to remove friction from people using their machine. They want to remove, you want to do one click. I've never heard of a business saying, no, we want to interview you before you use our online service. Could you imagine going on Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg says, look, before I let you on Facebook, I'd like to, quiz you and let you, see if you're right for Facebook. So what the fuck? Just let me use the thing. I'm willing to pay for it. No, we have to sit down and see what you're going to do with it. And I think that's just a really crazy thing. Now, QUBT, to your point, is a bit of a scammier situation where they basically had no capital, no revenue. They have $35,000 of revenue as a publicly traded company. It's not clear what they're doing. They're not really clearly have a roadmap for a gate-based quantum computer. It's not clear if they're making maybe like quantum-enabled devices. Are they doing quantum networking? Nobody's really clear. They were able to raise a lot of money because the company's name is Quantum Computing Inc., which is, amazing. The company's worth a few billion as a result. But, they're under investigation from a couple of regulatory agencies. They're in an index now. There's a lot of this sort of passive money that's like self-propagating companies into indices, which then self-propagate kind of into decent market caps. And there's this whole trading community that comes around it, and Vol ends up allowing quant funds to prop these companies up a little bit. So Vol is sort of quant funds' best friend, and the quant funds have funded both IonQ and D-Wave. Those companies have tried to do secondaries with fundamental investors and have not been able to find investors. But one of the biggest quant firms gave IonQ $1 billion. But there was a catch. They had to give them 2x warrant coverage, which is, a phenomenal deal for the fund. And I calculate the fund made $1 billion overnight by sort of screwing IonQ over. And QUBT is the same thing. They raised money at a deep, deep discount. And when you look at who invested in it, they weren't fundamental investors. They were actually quants because they were willing to take this really deep discount from the market. I think the stock was at 20 and they did a deal at 16 or something like that. And the guys were able to get out at 18 instantaneously and book a nice profit. And so they just rinse retail. I think that the idea that, quantum's even faster than NVIDIA, that sounds really great, but there's nothing further from the truth. I mean, that's just, I work on NVIDIAs every single day, and I've worked on quantum, which very few people have. I was one of the few people that ever used IonQ's computer on AWS. You can actually see what job number you're at. And at the time I was using IBM's quantum as well, there were 195 jobs submitted on IBM's quantum computers, and I was several of them. And on IonQ's computer at AWS, I was the lone person to use it. So it's a very small industry. My girlfriend worked with Scott Aronson, the very well-known quantum computer scientist. Brought him into OpenAI, and then now he's back at academia. She worked with him at MIT, and anybody who knows this space knows this is sort of a dog shit space that's just sort of not going anywhere fast.
Hey Martin, I have a question for you in regards to why do all the big tech companies keep pouring money, so much capex into quantum?
Sure.
Even though it seems like, I agree with you, it seems like a shit industry. Why is it, and what catalyst do you estimate to be the main point in which people will realize on stream that quantum is so shit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of answers to this. I'm just going to pull up a model real quick because I don't think all of them, and I think that's important. I don't think all of them are involved. So I'll give you an example. NVIDIA does not do quantum, and NVIDIA famously thinks quantum is a zero. And Jensen kind of said, I didn't even think these companies were public. He kind of did the stand-up comedy, shitting on them in public. But he kind of felt bad that he was shitting on all of them. And he kind of said, good luck. I wish you the best. But NVIDIA is not doing quantum. They're the kings of compute, and they're not doing quantum. And that tells you a lot. They have no patents on quantum. There are any people working on a quantum computer. I know NVIDIA in and out. This is not something they're interested in. There is a case someday that if people are going to use quantum computers, that they work with their flagship software CUDA, which is kind of a flagship compute platform. So there is a Q2Q that they maintain every now and then. But the reality is, NVIDIA is not bullish on quantum, or this $4 trillion company would be working on it. So that alone kind of tells you what you need to know. Some more companies that don't do quantum are Apple, Meta, Broadcom, Tesla. None of these companies think quantum's going anywhere. OpenAI, company that is using the most compute in the world at the moment, sees no place for quantum. So I think that's really telling. Now let's talk about the companies that do use it. So Microsoft has been spending $300 million a year on quantum. Microsoft also has a very famous research division. I have a friend whose dad ran that division, since the start of it. He's retired from Microsoft, very famous name. And Microsoft wanted to start taking their massive profits and doing kind of the Bell Labs style research. Bell Labs was such a huge influence on the tech industry. Everybody wanted to do Bell Labs. And AT&T made so much money that they just took their extra profits and threw it into this think tank that had the greatest minds in the world. And when you're Google or Microsoft, you say, gosh, we're making so much money. Gosh, we're on top of the world. We're the biggest market cap of any company, right? Microsoft's the biggest company in the world. Google's not far behind. What do we do with all this money? Well, if you're like me, you might say, well, let me look at the best mathematicians in the world. Wouldn't it be great to have Terry Tao work at Google? Well, Terry Tao doesn't work at Google, but people like him come work here, and we'll let you do whatever you want. Doesn't matter what it is. Google doesn't exactly work that way, nor does Microsoft. But the point is that quantum computing is one of these technologies of the future that they have worked on. Microsoft's worked on DNA computing. Microsoft's worked on memristors. Any future technology, there's somebody at Microsoft tinkering on it somewhere because the company's just so rich and has so much capital. Google's a little like that, but a little smaller. But Google, for some reason, one of the guys, Sergey or Larry, I won't say who, just has a really big interest in quantum. And Eric Schmidt also has an interest in quantum. I think they know, including the people at Google, they know that there's not anything really coming from it. But I think that it is a signal of technical superiority to say, we did it. We made the world's first quantum computer. It's like Bell Labs, who said we made the first transistor. They made the world's first programming language. They made Unix. I mean, they were the most productive people in the world. Not a dollar was made from Bell Labs for AT&T. Keep that in mind. So, it wasn't like, Bell Labs was some profit center. It was corporate philanthropy. AT&T was just too rich. They wanted to keep ties with the scientific community, which made sense. Google needs people like that at Google. So to have a division that's doing cool stuff, is great, but it hasn't worked for Google. Their moonshots, their X, Google Brain, none of this has really worked out. And even their AI stuff almost failed. They sort of have been shaken to the core to get back on track. But even their AI stuff was kind of non for profit for a while. So I think Microsoft and Google have this sort of, and Amazon to a much smaller extent. Amazon also is involved, much smaller though. Both Microsoft and Google and IBM, which we'll talk about in a second, are sitting there trying to do corporate philanthropy. IBM's a little different. IBM's weird. IBM made the first computers. They go back to CTR, which is computer tabulating records or something like that. It was like this really old cash register company as well that merged with IBM, and something called Hollerith. It all sort of fused together to form IBM. And they were making punch cards and things like that. And eventually they made System 360, big mainframes that needed manual operation. And IBM has a rich, long history in computing. And of course, they've lost that history and they've lost that success. But there is this like egotistical thing from IBM that maybe they can get it back with quantum. And IBM has quietly gone back on their quantum timeline. So for example, IBM said they'd have a 10,000 qubit machine this year. Well, that's a lot of qubits. But they actually wiped that off of their website, and you can find it on the Wayback Machine. But they're now pivoting to fidelity, which everyone is doing because the qubits aren't very good. If you have an AND gate, that means both operands have to be true. And the AND gate, true and true, is true. Anything else is false. True and false, false and true, false and false. That's the truth table for an AND gate. It should always work, right? Well, transistors are 99 and 18 nines. Fidelity. They're very, very reliable. Quantum's only around 99.9, which is not very good. And if you try to create a million gate program, those errors propagate and you can't really run the program. So all the companies have said, time out, we're not going to make more qubits, we're just going to make better qubits for a while. And it's been years. We had 99.9 a long time ago, and we're close to getting to 99.9. So if it takes 10 years to add a 9, we're still 30 or 40 years away from a useful quantum computer. And that's assuming that we, work really hard on this and invest really hard on this. In tech, there's always winters. People give up on technologies. They try back later. That's what happened with AI 3 or 4 times. In quantum, I think we're going to get a quantum winner because all of this pump, it's all sizzle and no steak. The people that fund this stuff were going to say, well, we thought quantum was going to be big in 2025, and the stocks went up and then they went down and we ignored it. And I think that, whether or not these companies will keep working on it and be able to fund themselves and not pivot away and still stick to the problem and actually make progress, we'll see. The fidelity problem could have some like exponential breakthrough where all of a sudden we have high fidelity, high quality qubits that we can scale enormously. But I would say even in the best case scenario, we're 15 years away from that. And again, what is that? That is just doing semi-primes or biprimes, with Shors, which there's no business on planet Earth that I'm aware that is sitting there wondering how fast they can factor prime numbers. Maybe a couple of hackers, nation states, but really not a big business use case or a big commercial use case. So I feel like the big companies have this scientific challenge. It's a really cool question. If you've ever done any computer science, this is one of the coolest things that there is. And people have been fantasizing, including IBM. IBM's been working on quantum computing since the 80s. They wrote their first papers on quantum computers in 88. And since then, it's just been this crazy academic kind of chase. And, there's cold fusion. There's other things like that, room temperature semiconductor. I mean, memristors, holography. There's tons of advanced technologies that sort of have never come out and people still work on. And sometimes it just sort of becomes its own meme of we want to be the first to actually show that we did it. But the question of why is notice these aren't companies, the big tech companies, they're not sort of showcasing this as like prominent or important in their roadmap. I think it's just bragging rights in a lot of ways. And AI to some extent has become that as well. And the meme of that, like, well, we didn't know what AI would be good for or when it would be good, and it just sort of magically became good. Well, I don't think just because something looks like that the same thing's going to happen. AI had this miracle moment with LLMs, but we've been plugging away on fusion for a long time with no breakthroughs. And just because something like that existed and then there was a breakthrough, doesn't mean, you know, the same will happen. You and I can plug away on whittling wood and try to make computers out of wood, but we'll never get there. So I think that, you know, it's really this false premise that quantum computing is this futuristic thing and a time is coming. But, you know, when, where, what, and how. And if you actually talk to people in quantum, like John Preskill, Scott Aronson, I mentioned Chris Monroe, who I started criticizing that, you know, his public comments were very bearish for IonQ, even though he's the founder of IonQ. And all of a sudden, IonQ, who I know listens to me very closely, IonQ hired him back as the chief scientific officer. So he's come back to IonQ and, you know, is going to try to fix things up. But even still, the comments he made just weeks ago were totally at odds with their company CEO, Niccolo De Masi, who's a SPAC guy. Was a SPAC of, he's the CEO of the company now. He was the SPAC sponsor. And, you know, like I said, he said ridiculous things like that, like the base case scenario for IonQ is Cisco, which is 200 billion. And the bull case is NVIDIA, which is 4 trillion. And he's going to be in between those two. So if he gets quantum computing to work, he's going to have NVIDIA's market cap. And he already has quantum networking working, so he's going to have Cisco's market cap. This is their CEO. He said that he has Shores in 2 years, which just weeks ago his own chief scientific guy said Shores is 30 years away. So really, really wild stuff there. I got to jump on a call. I'll see you guys later.